Now, first, I just want to give you guys my breakdown of white privilege in America, because I don't think a lot of people really understand it. They believe that white people are not privileged because there's poor white people. But I really want you guys to imagine a black man walking down the street. He's pulled over for a broken tail light. We know how it goes. The situation escalates and it ends in tragedy. Now, across town, a white man, he storms the Capitol with a weapon and is escorted out unharmed. This is not a coincidence. It's not an anomaly. It's American history repeating itself in plain sight. And I want to just ask, whatever happened to Back the Blue during the January 6th insurrection, riot, protest, all of the above? You know my take on this, family. What happened to Back in the Blue? Because again, the police officer, the black one that shot, forgot the lady's name, that was trying to climb through the window, what was very clear sign of aggression to try to get into the chambers where the congressmen and women were, and he did his job. What about the white police officer or white police officers with an S that got brutalized, assaulted by the rioters and insurrectionists during the January 6th protests? What happened to those people? Donald Trump exonerated and cleared them all. They're all off. I don't believe anyone from the January 6th protest, insurrection, and riot is still incarcerated. It may be one or two people. But again, they demonized Back in the Blue when the black officer did his job, right? Because again, why are you trying to enter the chambers of the congressmen and women, even though you were told not to enter the property, and then they closed off these things. They closed off this picture. And here's another thing. The congressmen and women, they were hiding. So they were fearful. They were scared. You have hundreds of people outside storming the Capitol. I think I would be quite fearful myself. And the only protection that we have is a couple of Secret Service men, a couple of Capitol Police. And we already have reports that the police outside, they have their riot gear, and a lot of them are being harmed. Back to blue when it's only white on blue. It's very interesting. But I want to give my take here, because white privilege in America begins with chattel slavery, where whiteness itself became the standard for humanity and citizenship. And the Constitution, the 3/5 compromise, institutionalized that black lives were worth less while whiteness meant full representation. Because I don't know if you guys are familiar with the 3/5 compromise. Some people allude to that, they only counted as 3/5 of a person. And the reason why they stated that is because for every 5 black people, they only counted 3 of them. Here's another thing. So if you had a plantation and you had 5 slaves, 3 of them will count as a vote. Count as 5 of them will only count as 3 votes. But then again, they couldn't vote. So that's why people say they only count as 3/5 of a person. I just want to make sure I lay that down very thick. Laws like the Naturalization Act of 1790 restricted citizenship to free white persons, laying the groundwork for generational advantage. Wealth was accumulated through free black labor, while white families were able to build generational land ownership. Then we come to segregation, Jim Crow, and structural power, because in the 1930s, the federal government's Homeowners Loan Corporation created maps that marked black neighborhoods as high risk just because they were black. White families were given loans. Black families were locked out of home ownership, the single biggest source of generational wealth. And don't tell me that crime rates were high back in the 1930s amongst Black Americans, because it was not. There were some of the most peaceful communities in America. White schools receive better funding, newer textbooks, and better teachers, while black schools operated on scraps, even though they were paying taxes, ladies and gentlemen. And white offenders receive leniency, while black people face mass incarceration that was exemplified by the war on drugs, which punished crack cocaine. You guys not listening, which punished crack cocaine in black neighborhoods far more harshly than powder cocaine used in white suburbs. They even classified powder cocaine versus crack cocaine. Oh, crack cocaine is more addictive, but how do you get crack cocaine? You have to have regular cocaine or powder cocaine, do you not? And I already explained this just yesterday of how the contradiction between the crack epidemic and the opioid epidemic and how the government responded to each. Let's crack down on these thugs, these gangsters, these drugs pushers, these pimps, these hoes, drug users, etc. Let's throw them all in jail. Well, you have doctors, nurses, pharmaceutical agents, promoters of these opioids. No, let's create a legislation. Let's lock up a couple of people so the others get the hint. But let's provide resources for the families who have been harmed by this epidemic of opioids. Even though we have thousands of people that we know that actually wrote fraudulent, prescriptions for people to stay hooked to these drugs, because when I sell this particular opioid, and the more of these opioids that I sell, I get 25% kickback from the drug company. Even though we know that these people are addicted to the opioid and a lot of their ailments and issues and problems and pain has already gone away. I told you about this, family. Now, I also want you guys to compare the police response to the Black Lives Matter protests, tear gas, rubber bullets, mass arrests, versus the January 6th Capitol riot where rioters were escorted out. All right, guys. All right. You guys been rowdy. All right. Somebody got shot in there. All right. Now it's enough. Even though you're climbing on the walls, you're taking dumps on politicians' desks, you are basically, this all out riots within the Capitol. You're destroying government property. That's okay. Those things can be fixed. All right. You rambunctious bunch of you guys. Let's get out of here. And the only thing Black Lives Matter, not the organization, the movement, it's a difference. I'm not talking about the organization that was about transgender and gays and all of that. No. That she took millions of dollars and bought homes around the country. You got a damn scam artist everywhere you go. Do you not, Bernie Madoff? But anyway, they started to do counter protests that all lives matter. They do. All lives do matter. Kanye West and Candace Owens, when he was in Paris, France, wore White Lives Matter t-shirts. Yeah, white lives matter too. But that wasn't about the movement. It's just stating that we see that all these groups of people in America are being somewhat treated more fairly and more equal than Black people. And we've been killed by race soldiers with badges and white supremacist ideologists and all other sorts of people for various reasons, nonviolent reasons. A lot of them very unjustified. And we're just stating that, hey, our lives matter. That's it. But people didn't like it. Now, studies also show how Black patients receive less pain medication than white patients with the same conditions because they think that our pain tolerance is higher. Why? They think we have a third muscle in our calf, thus we jump higher. Oh, they got that third muscle in their calf. That's why they can jump higher. Really? So wait a minute. Doesn't that contradict the 3/5 of a person? Because then we should be 5/6 of a person. We should be a little extra, should we not? Now, granted, when it comes to employment and wealth, a Black man with a college degree is statistically less likely to be hired than a white man with a high school diploma. We already know this. And the median wealth of white families is nearly 8 to 10 times greater than black families. And white privilege also shows up in very small ways: shopping without being followed, living without fear of being racially profiled, having history books that reflect your image as the hero, and the eradication of history when it comes to textbooks so people don't feel guilty about the past. Oh, okay. And again, white privilege is not just personal bias. It's institutional advantages. It persists because American society was built to center whiteness. When it comes to laws, education, policing, economics, all structured to preserve it. Even when the laws change, when they sign legislation in civil rights as well as eroding acts, these structures still remain. Now, granted, you're going to have some black people, Thomas Sowell, Candace Owens, the Hodge twins. I'm just naming a couple of people that I know that will really debate and contradict what I'm stating and go against what I'm stating. Not that I have anything against these people. I just know why they do the things that they do. Because speaking truth to power is not profitable. Let me say it again. Speaking truth to power is not profitable. If anything, it's the opposite. You can lose a couple of dollars. Now, when you start speaking to power in the tone, verbiage that promotes and make them seem better than what they are, that can be very profitable. Now, granted, white privilege doesn't mean that white people don't struggle. Again, white privilege does not mean that white people don't struggle. It means race is not an additional obstacle. You get that? I know that white people struggle, but the one thing that is sometimes the determining factor is race is not an obstacle. See, black communities fight double battles. We fight against poverty and against systems designed to block them. And true justice means dismantling the invisible scaffolding of whiteness that America was built upon. It didn't start with police sirens. It didn't start with college admissions. It started on stolen land with a stolen people. And through generations, white privilege evolved, not just as an idea, but as a system, and a system that doesn't require intent to cause harm. Only inertia to keep working. But maybe I'm not the right face to tell a story. You know, in order to inform and or manipulate groups of people, you have to have people that look like them because other people, they just won't convince them. Like me speaking to you guys, if you're white, Asian, Hispanic, it may not come off the same way if I was white. You may be more inclined to accept it. You may become more of a sponge versus a brick. So with that being said, I'll let somebody else with some of you guys' familiar skin tones to break this down even more so.
Because if you know the history of the whole concept of whiteness, if you know the history of the whole concept of the white race, where it came from and for what reason, you know that it was a trick and it's worked brilliantly. See, prior to the mid to late 1600s in the colonies of what would become the United States, there was no such thing as the white race. Those of us of European descent did not refer to ourselves by that term really ever before then. In fact, in the old countries of Europe, we had spent most of our time killing each other. We didn't love each other. We weren't one big happy family. The side of my family that comes from Scotland, hell, they didn't even worry about fighting people outside of Scotland. Highlanders and Lowlanders just fought the hell out of each other. So there was no white race, but in the colonies of what would become the United States, what did we see in the 1660s, 1670s? We began to see that Africans of indentured servant status, many of them not enslaved yet, they were not necessarily permanently enslaved. Some were, others were indentured, like many poor Europeans, for periods of 7 to 11 years. They could work off their indenture and then they would be free labor technically. Realized, as did the white indentured servants, the Europeans who hadn't even been called white yet, that they had a lot of things in common, like the fact that they were all getting their clock cleaned by the elite. And so they would get together more than our history books taught us, to foment rebellion against the elite, to try to get a better deal for themselves on the basis of economic necessity and economic justice. And what did the elite do? When you see that you're outnumbered by black and white folks who are penniless, landless, peasants, you have to do one of two things. You either have to kill them all, but you can't do that because who's going to work? Rich folks weren't going to. They had to get poor people to work. Whole point was to be a person of leisure back in those days. That was the goal, was not to work. So you couldn't kill them all. You didn't want to kill them all. You had to do the work yourself. You had to build your own levee, build your own house. No, pick your own tobacco, harvest your own cotton. No, we're not going to do any of that. So you can't kill them, but you can co-opt them. And so the elite in Virginia, for example, in the colony, begins to give certain carrots to people of European descent, saying things like, you know, we're going to let you own a little land, not much, but just a little. And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. Now you're free labor. And by the way, once you're free labor, you get 50 acres of land just because you're free labor, see? So we're going to cut you in on this deal. We're going to let you enter into contracts. We're going to let you testify in court. And here's the best of all, we're going to put you on the slave patrol to keep those people in line, right? The idea was you're still going to get your clock clean. We still don't like you. We still aren't going to really empower you or change your economic subordination, but we're going to make you honorary members of this team, and you're going to help us keep those other people down. And so they got a little taste of power, and it did effectively divide and conquer those coalitions. Those rebellions began to stop almost instantly. Fast forward to the Civil War era, you have rich white folks in the South, where I come from, standing up and openly admitting that the reason they're prepared to secede from the Union, and the only reason they ever articulated publicly, ever, was to maintain and extend slavery and white supremacy, not only where it already existed, but into the newly acquired, that is to say, stolen territories from Mexico to the West. That was what they said. Now we lie about it. We say it wasn't about slavery, that it was about states' rights. Yes, the right of the states to keep and maintain slaves, exactly. But back then,
it was about Southern pride.
And they had no shame, so they didn't try and cover it up. They openly said it, but once again, the rich didn't want to go do the work. Are you kidding? No, they're going to get poor people to go fight for them. And the poor folks didn't even own slaves. Now think, how do you get poor people who don't even own the shirt on their back, let alone slaves, to go fight to keep your slaves for you? You've got to convince them that their skin is more important than their economic interest. Because think about it. If I am a farmer who has to charge you $1 a day or $2 a week to work on your farm and harvest that tobacco or pick that cotton, but you can get a black person to do it for free because you own them, who's going to get the job? Not me. In other words, slavery actually undermined the wages and the wage base, the economic floor of the typical white working class or low income person. But they were told, if these people are free, they're going to take your job. No, fool, they got your job. That's the point. And so at some level, again, working class white people being harmed by white privilege, relatively being advantaged, right? Being given a leg up, being given a membership to the club, but in absolute terms being kept economically subordinated by the very thing that gave them a sense of superiority. How's that for irony? Then in the present era, this hasn't stopped. This is not ancient history. Now we have people running around insisting that we should close the border with Mexico because if we don't, the wages of working class people will continue to fall. The implication being that the only reason workers are paid like crap in this country is because the border is open. But if you believe that, you would actually have to believe that if that border were closed, that all these owners of capital and industry would just say, oh, well, you figured us out. Here, it's a raise. Do we really believe that the only thing keeping bosses from paying people more is the presence of low-wage, medium, semi-skilled labor from south of this artificial border? Is that really what we believe? We know that if that border is closed, it isn't going to be closed to capital. It isn't going to be closed to goods. If you have a border that can be crossed by capital looking for the highest return on investment or goods looking for the highest price, but labor is chained to its country of origin, How is that going to work to the benefit of working people? By definition, it doesn't. By definition, it immiserates the working class. Divide and conquer. But the best example of all, perhaps, in the contemporary era, in the greater New Orleans area after Katrina. Here you have two communities that were the most hard hit. Lower Ninth Ward, mostly black community, 94% African American, about 40% official poverty rate, heavy working class community. And right across the canal, St. Bernard Parish, Chalmette, 95% white, also working class, high levels of poverty, economically very similar. And at the end of the day, in those first few days of September 2005, more similar than they probably would have realized. Because when those levees broke, they all got their stuff jacked. They all got their stuff destroyed. But if you had asked white folks in Chalmette, and I've done it, who was the cause of the problems in the greater New Orleans area prior to that flooding, they would have pointed across that canal at those black folks, wouldn't have called them black folks, and would have said, there, that's the problem. 70% of the white folks in St. Bernard Parish voted for David Duke, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, former head of the largest Ku Klux Klan group in the United States when he ran for governor in 1991. 7 out of 10 gladly voted for him because he was blaming black folks for all of their problems, and they bought it. What's the irony? The irony is that while they were blaming black people for their problems, while they were blaming black people for the conditions of the greater New Orleans area in which they lived, nobody was paying attention, least of all they, to the fact that these white elite politicians, either in Baton Rouge or in Washington, whose job it was to secure those levees, to make sure that levy funds were spent in the proper way and that they were spent at all, those mostly white and mostly elite politicians did nothing. At the end of the day, it wasn't just the black folks in the lower Ninth Ward they didn't care about. They really couldn't have given a rat's ass about those poor and working class white folks either. And yet, when the people of Chalmette, people of St. Bernard Parish got back into session, first time they had a city council meeting, parish council meeting after the flooding, the lights aren't even on yet. The water isn't even hooked up. And the first order of business was to pass an ordinance saying that you couldn't rent property in St. Bernard Parish to anyone who wasn't a blood relative. Now, I'll leave it to your imagination as to why you'd want to pass a law. That law had never existed before. But now that it's been emptied out and you don't know who might come back, that's a damn good way to keep black people out, isn't it? Because if you're 95% white to begin with, if you pass an ordinance that says that, that's a great, you can't say no blacks need apply. You can't say no blacks allowed, but that was an ingenious way to get around the law. Now, they got caught. There was a lawsuit threatening, they got rid of the ordinance. But my point in bringing it up is to say, once again, divide and conquer is working. These white folks in Chalmette need to march across that canal and join hands with the black folks who've been sitting there more than willing to work with them for an awful long time, and march on Baton Rouge and march on DC and march on the Corps of Engineers and recognize their commonality of interest. But the whiteness and the lure of whiteness has tricked these have nothing in their bank account white people into believing that they got more in common with the rich white folks on St. Charles Avenue that didn't lose anything in that flooding than they have in common with the black working class folks who live about 500 yards away.
That was a wonderful breakdown of white privilege and how the elites trick lower class whites. And we see that today, ladies and gentlemen, when you have, and I don't want to make, even though it's political, because again, based upon the laws, legislation that have occurred, of how a lot of low income class whites voted for Donald Trump, even though he said he's going to do most when it comes to economics for the top 10% of Americans, which in regards to still white. So when we look at this breakdown that Tim Wise just did, it kind of reminds me of the Bacon's Rebellion of 1676, where black and white indentured servants rebelled together. And the response, laws were passed that gave poor whites small social advantages, land rights, and access to militias while permanently enslaving black people. Now, this was the invention of a race as a legal structure, even though this kind of started off back in the late 1400s by one of the popes that really classified dark colored melanated skinned people as slaves. And they took that same ideology to the Americas. But this is how they divided the working class solidarity, because enslaved people was counted as 3/5 for white representation. No voice, no rights. Yet our bodies help white landowners gain more congressional power. We had all sorts of indigenous displacement. Genocide led to the Homestead Act of 1862, which gave millions acres of land to white settlers, the origin of generational wealth. So as I look at what he just stated and what goes on even today, because white privilege today isn't just about what's given, but it's about what's taken away. Think about it. A white teen caught with marijuana, slap on the wrist. A black teen charged as an adult. That's usually how it is. A white man protesting lockdown with a gun, seen as a patriot. A black man protesting injustice, seen as a threat. And we're referencing college admissions. Wealthy white students use legacy status, not grades. Oh, they're just not smart enough. That's why they're not going to Yale, Harvard, Stanford, Brown. No, they use legacy status, a system rooted in historical white-only access to gain entry into elite schools. Then, in referencing corporate America, white-sounding names get 50% more callbacks. They just did a little special. Someone did a special, I believe it was either on YouTube, X, or TikTok, of how they used a black name or a black-sounding name, no hits, no pings, no callbacks. Changed his name to a white person's name, called back, email the same day. So that's why a lot of black folks stop naming their children, I would like to believe, Lil Day Day, Lil Ronjo. They started naming them names like John Brown, things of that nature. And again, it just depends on sometimes your economic level, sometimes your environment, sometimes your community. Sometimes we have these subset cultures in Black society. Depends on what you've been called or what your name. White privilege doesn't mean your life hasn't been hard. Because that's what at times when you speak about white privilege, white people will always defend the notion that they struggle, that their life has been hard. Again, white privilege doesn't mean your life has been hard. It means your skin color hasn't been one of the things that's making it harder. White people today, not back when you had the Irish and you had all these different subsects of Europeans here, where they, in some regards, the Italians, the Irish, the British would discriminate amongst each other. You don't have that today. So there's no racial color barrier when it comes for a white person applying for a job that could be qualified and a black person applying for a job that could be more qualified. I just did this for you guys because, again, hopefully understanding white privilege isn't about guilt. It's not about guilt. It's about responsibility. If the system was designed in the way that it is today, that means that it can be redesigned. But it cannot be redesigned if we continue to believe that it doesn't exist.